Hello chess fans, it's round 7 of the World Chess Olympiad in Budapest, and in this video the most amazing game of the tournament is played in the top match between India and China. Maybe this is even a great contender for the best game of the year. Some absolutely madness in this game is happening and I'm really looking forward to show it to you. So we have the game between Gukesh and Wei Yi, and then I see you're thinking, that's a pity that it's not Gukesh against Ding Liren. Well, Ding is sitting out today. He is not playing in this match. And that brings, of course, the discussion. Why is Ding not playing? Is he afraid to play against Gukesh? Maybe he doesn't want to show his preparation. One thing is clear, Ding is not in his best shape. So he also definitely enjoyed a day off. Lot of speculation. We leave that for later. You want to see this game between Gukesh, world's number 5, and Wei Yi, world's number 8. An absolute top game. And as I said, some absolutely amazing things are happening. So I'm ready to show you what's happening. And then one little favor, just give this video a like, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notifications not to miss any of the Olympiads action. So here we go. Gukesh starts the game with 1e4. We have the Sicilian, knight f3, d6, knight c3, knight f6, and white of course can still play here the move d4 when we have the main lines of the Sicilian, probably a Najdorf, as Wei Yi is a real expert in this opening, but Gukesh goes for this move, bishop e2. Interesting subtle idea. And now after something like a6, d4, we may still have a Najdorf. But Wei Yi didn't want to try that move a6. Played here the move e5. That is a very principled move as white refrained from opening the center with the move d2, d4. So we get a totally different type of game, more positional type of play, which also matches very well with Gukesh's playing style. So now, interesting maneuver. Last move by white was bishop e2, but here the bishop goes to c4. It is now, of course, much nicer placed on this diagonal, targeting the pawn on f7. Black has placed the pawn on e5. So the bishop on c4 is looking good. Bishop e7, d3, knight c6, bishop to g5. Very nice positional chess as white is thinking about trading off that knight on f6 so that you better get more control over the central d5 square with the knight on c3 and the bishop on c4. That's exactly what happens. Castling kingside played, bishop takes f6, bishop takes back, and the knight comes into d5. Very typical structure in a lot of anti-Sicilians. You will see this also in the Sicilian Sveshnikov. A lot of these positions are about the d5 square, but black also has his own ideas. Look how Wei Yi plays, as I think he plays the opening very well. Bishop e6, queen d2, a6 played, so black is preparing the move b5. That's exactly what happened. After castling kingside, b5 played, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to b3. And now a typical plan, king h8. Very good idea. So why do you play this move? Well, at some point you want to play the move f7, f5. But you don't want to stand on this diagonal, potential discovered checks, for instance. First, white goes for the move a3, so that if the bishop comes under threat, the bishop can always come back to a2. Rook b8 played, mysterious rook move, but well, black is looking for some play on the queen side later on. White goes for h3. Maybe also not very clear what white's idea is here at this point, but black has a very clear plan. g6, and after the move c3, the bishop goes to g7. Black decides to keep that bishop on the board. If you go back one move, by the way, there was still this opportunity here to take on f6 and take back with the queen, and then also the other light squared bishops can be swapped. Looks like a very even middle game. But in order to play ambitiously, white should also take here some positional risks. What these risks are, we will find out very soon. After the move c3, black goes bishop g7, as I said, bishop a2, f5. This is exactly black's sort of counterplay. So black really wants to go f4, close the position in the center, maybe go for a pawn storm with g5, h5 in King's Indian type of style. And well, black has a space advantage, very nice pieces, and good chances to build up an attack. So here white decides to go for the move knight g5, attacking the bishop. Knight is defended by the queen. The bishop goes back to g8, securing the king, keeping an eye on that knight on d5. And here white, seeing potential danger here with the move f4 when the knight on g5 is no longer defended by the queen, white decides here to open up the position. Pawn takes f5, but black takes back with a g-pawn. That's a very good move. Now you have a very nice pawn center. And after the move f4, that was white's idea. Now, very impressive move by Wei Yi as the move c4 is played to attack the knight on d5, as the bishop at this moment doesn't protect that knight. Pawn takes c4, b takes c4, bishop takes c4. This is the pawn sacrifice, and one of the ideas is that black can come forward here with a move like e4. It's a move I do really like. One of the ideas of this move is, well, you get a protected passed pawn, but also the knight on g5 is in trouble. There are always ideas like h6, and the knight can be trapped. Then white will be forced to probably sacrifice the knight for the pawn. You can get maybe 2 or 3 pawns for it. Very complicated stuff. But looks like black is in very good shape. Especially Sveshnikov players will understand what I mean. Like, these bishops are monsters, exerting a lot of pressure on white's position. And also that knight on g5 is out of play. But instead of advancing the pawn, Wei Yi decided here to take on f4. It's also an understandable move, as you do open up the diagonal for the bishop anyway. You do get a square on e5 for one of your pieces. But now black is threatening to take the knight on g5. Don't take on f4 and defend that knight, as there is rook takes b2 and white's queen side is falling apart. But instead the knight goes back to f3. Now the knight is safe again. And that, of course, would not have been possible had the pawn moved forward from e5 to e4. I think here these double pawns, they are quite vulnerable, can be picked up later. But Wei Yi had a very concrete idea in mind, which I absolutely dislike. He goes for knight a5. I believe that a plan based on more centralization with something like knight e5, or instead maybe rook e8 with the idea to come to e4 with a rook. I think that is more in the spirit of this position. But he goes for knight a5, attacking the bishop. After bishop a2, keeping everything defended, knight b3 played. Bishop takes b3, rook takes b3 is forced. And, well, interesting clash between 2 knights versus 2 bishops. White is up a pawn. And, well, not yet, but he can take on f4, which is in fact the move played by Gukesh. He decided here to take, which is probably imprecise. A more precise way of playing here is rook f2 to overprotect your second rank. And in order to generate some play, black probably will have to take on d5. And after queen takes, queen b6, threatening to take on b2, you go back with the queen. And if you attack the pawn on b2 one more time, there is rook e1. This is the key move. As you're about to go rook e2 and defend the pawn from the side, know that you cannot take everything on b2, because at the end of the line there is rook e8, and black is forced to give up the bishop. So that's a very deep line, but I think rook f2, it's a very impressive prophylactical move, and I think that a player of Gukesh's caliber should be able to find it. But instead, he goes for knight takes f4. Very greedy move, taking the pawn. There's queen b6, check, attacking the pawn on b2 as well. There's also rook f2, but now there's rook b8. And here the difference is that the bishops are still both on the board. Tremendous pressure on the b file. How are you going to deal with that as white? As, for instance, playing a move like rook b1 just runs into bishop takes c3, exploiting the pin on the b file as the bishop can't be captured. Things are looking very nice. The alternative is to go rook a2, but then this rook on a2 is just really horribly misplaced. We'll maybe not even see the daylight again. There are probably even tactics with a rook move attacking the rook on a2 with the bishop. Anyway, rook d1 was played, so you give up the pawn on b2. Black captured, everything comes off the board, and then the white rook is able to take on d6. So we do get this endgame Rook endgame with 2 minor pieces each. Incredibly interesting stuff. Black can take on c3, but then the pawn on a6 will be captured, so white will emerge with that extra pawn. But black goes for a5. That's an ambitious move. Rook d8. And now after bishop takes pawn, the knight comes in to d5, attacking the bishop. And black does have a big problem, as knight e7 is the main threat. And then the bishop on g8 is pinned. So black has to go here for a rook check on b1. King goes to f2, and now it's rook d1, pinning the knight on d5. So it's a long, basically forced sequence of moves. You cannot take on c3 as it hangs the rook on d8. But there is rook takes g8, guys. King takes g8, knight takes c3. And here we have 2 knights against the rook, 3 pawns each. And who is playing for a win? Well, that is definitely white in this endgame. White is not risking anything. He's never going to lose this pawn. Rook c1. Attacking the knight, knight b5. So the pawn is well defended. Rook c2 check. And here you got to make an awkward decision what to do with the king. Because, for instance, if you go king g3, there is f4 check. And if you take it, well, there's rook takes g2. And the more pawns are coming off the board, the closer black is getting to a draw. Because the only thing you need to do in these kind of endgames is to remove these 2 pawns, all white pawns. And then you have this endgame of a knight, 2 knights versus a king. And that is theoretically a draw. There are some exceptions where there's still a black pawn on the board, but let's not go into detail there. King f1 was played. White wants to keep as many pawns as possible on the board. Now black king comes to the center, knight fd4, attacking the rook, attacking the pawn on f5, rook c1, king e2, king comes to the center, king f6, black is in time to defend the pawn, knight d6, white does attack it one more time, rook c3, and then you don't really want to take there on f5 because you hang the pawn on a3. So knight goes back to b5, protecting the pawn, attacking the rook, rook c1, king comes to the center, rook goes to the other side to hit the pawn, king f2, rook c1 back. But everything is under control still, but how is white going to make progress? Well, first, the king got to be defended, knight e2, attacking the rook, rook b1, knight bc3, very nice construction. So the knights are safe, and after rook b3, there's a4. So everything is well protected here. King e5, g3. That's a good move. Rook b6. Now the king comes here again. So with the pawn on g3, also the pawn is defended. You're controlling the f4 square. Rook b4, king d3, h6. Waiting move by black. King e3, rook b3, pinning the knight. King goes back. Rook b4, repetition of moves. But now, knight g1. Very good move. So the knight is on its way to f3. Rook b8 played, knight f3, and the king is forced to go back. That's why also the pawn is on g3 to cover the f4 square. The black king can't go there. King f6, knight e4. So step by step, you see that white is making progress. Rook d8. You gotta watch out. Maybe king e5 is on the agenda. So king e3, rook c8, king d3, rook d8, knight ce2. The knights, they got to keep each other defended. Rook b8. And now knight f4, very good move. Rook b4, attacking the pawn, runs into knight e5, knight fork, winning the rook. So that's not possible. Rook b1, knight e5 anyway, king e5, knight c3, knight is back, rook h1, knight f3, check, king d6, h4. What is going to happen? Well, maybe at some point the king can walk in. Maybe white is able to win one of the pawns at some point. Rook h3. Black is trying to force the issue here by attacking the pawn on g3. Look at this. Knight e2 played, defending the pawn, and black goes for the move f4. And black succeeds in trading off one pair of pawns because you can't take on f4 with your pawn. Then the knight on f3 will be taken. And if you take with a knight, well, it's rook takes g3, and black is getting closer to its goal. So here, look at this. Knight f g1. The knight goes back, while the other knight defends the pawn on g3. So the rook is under threat. Rook h1. Pawn takes f4. Rook takes f4. Rook takes h4. But here the big difference is that one pair of pawns have been swapped, but white all of a sudden has a passed pawn. The knight comes back very quickly, attacking the rook. Rook h1. And white is pushing the pawn to f5 The pawn cannot be attacked by the king. The knight's covering the e5 square. And what should black do? Well, I guess that's something like rook a1, trying to attack the pawn is a good idea. Was not played. In that case, white probably got to go for knight c3, but you can wait with your king in front of the pawn, and probably there are very good drawing chances, as it's very difficult for white to activate a knight from c3 without giving up the pawn on a4. Anyway, black had a different idea. Black wanted to push here the h-pawn. That's also a very logical approach, but now the knight comes to c3. Black goes for h4, knight e4, attacking the king. King goes back to d7, and now it's knight e5. Look at these knights. They are supporting the march of the f-pawn. King d8, and well, here is the move f6. And this is an absolutely incredible position. And all of a sudden, well, you got to reckon with ideas like the pawn coming forward, and maybe the rook doesn't have a stable square to hide behind on the f-file. Maybe the king can attack the rook at some point. So things are incredibly tricky all of a sudden. And well, black played here the move h3, which turns out to be a serious error. Probably you got to go here for rook d1 and give a check. And probably I'm not even able to explain you all the details of that move. It's really, really deep computer stuff here. And imagine the players getting lower on time. Such a long game. h3 played, f7. So here is the threat to get a new queen. Rook f1. And now it's knight g5, attacking the pawn on h3. If you can eliminate that pawn, that would be very big news. So black goes for the move h2 and is about to promote the h-pawn first. But the key idea here is that one of the knights can interfere on the f-file so that the rook is not able to cover the f-pawn. Apparently the best move, which was not played, is knight ef3. Because here you're threatening to promote your pawn. If you do give a check, king c4, and you get a queen eventually, then white also gets a queen. And after king c7, the big difference is that you have dropped back with your knight from e5, is that the other knight can come in to e6 with check. And apparently, well, there are a lot of checks here, and this should lead to mate at some point. I mean, the king doesn't have any defenders here. The queen and knight are an incredibly strong duo. But knight gf3 was played. That leads to a different situation. And what should be played here now? Now, for instance, one move which was not played, it's h1 queen. Well, there is f8 queen, and this is leading to checkmate by force. Like here again, the queen and rook are out of play, but I show you one sample line is that you go for a bunch of checks, you keep the king in the corner, and you capture a pawn, and this will lead to checkmate. That's one of the key ideas. Of course, this was not calculated by Gukesh, but he of course senses that the black king is lacking support. What should black do? Well, that is probably insert a check on d1, because after this check, king c4, h1 queen, f8 queen, after king c7, at least the rook is now taking away some squares along the d-file. That's a crucial insertion. After queen f7, king b6, there are no good checks for the knight to come closer. If you do play knight d7, for instance, it's rook takes knight, queen takes f3 with a drawn queen endgame. So that is a very instructive way probably to save the game. And well, there are probably other variations as well, but you get an idea of what may have happened. But instead, after this move, knight gf3, king e7 was played. So the king covers the promotion square, but now it is knight takes h2. And that is, of course, a big relief for white, that the big trump for black is gone now. Note that eliminating the pawn is never really be a good option. You pick up the pawn on a5, and with knight and pawn, it's an easy win for white. But there followed this. Look, rook a1. Black is trying to eliminate the pawn on a4 first. And now, this is probably one of the most amazing positions I have recently come across. And it's in a real game, and it's in a top game between two of the best players in the world. Knight from h2 comes to g4. And that's an incredible resource. Now black wants to capture the pawn on a4 under favorable conditions. So he does give a check on a3 first. That is Very clever. And where do you go with the king? Well, if you go to the 4th rank, then you can take on a4 with check. Then you can probably just take the knight on g4 as well and then eliminate the pawn on f7. So the king gotta go back to the 2nd rank. Is it c2, d2 or e2? But apparently the key move is to go to d2. It's the only winning move in this position. As for instance, if you go back with the king to e2, it's rook takes a4. And if you play knight h6 to prepare this idea with knight g6, well, there is rook e4 and the knight is hanging. That's why the king is so badly placed on the e file. If you do go to the c file instead, you go rook takes a4, knight h6, rook a2 check, and after king b3, there is rook to f2. This cannot be avoided. The rook comes to the f file to cover the promotion square, and whatever happens, the rook is able to eliminate that f pawn, and we get 2 knights versus king. That is a theoretical draw. So why is king d2 such a brilliant, such a genius move? Is because after rook takes pawn, now the knight comes to h6. And here the big threat is knight g6 with check, followed by promotion. If you do play rook f4, there is knight g6. Once again, it's a knight fork. You can first pick up the rook before promoting your f pawn. So then, of course, black tried here still rook a2 in the game. Important check. But here the king comes to e3. That is the big difference. That's why the rook, that's why the king had to be on the d file to now be able to come to e3 and prevent the rook to get behind that passed pawn. Rook a3 check plate, king e4, and here the black rook is no longer able to stop the f pawn. Black resigned because after something like rook a4 check, the king comes to f5, the rook is out of play, rook a1 with the idea to give this check on f1 and eliminate the pawn anyway is met by knight g6, king d7, f8 queen, and now if you do play rook f1, you're not able to get rid of that annoying queen as the knight comes back to f4 and white is up a queen and will win the game easily. This is the final position of the critical match in the Olympiad. Round 7 was won by India in the match with China. A very big win. So that means that India is still unbeaten, has managed to win all his first 7 matches. Very impressively, is 1 point ahead of Iran. So I guess that they are going to play each other in the next round. But this is a very big step towards the gold medal. Let's see what's going to happen in the next couple of rounds. But of course, also let me know what you think of this absolutely genius endgame by Gukesh. He is in great shape, and this is absolute world championship level. So let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. See you soon again.